Hi, my name is Hosni. Why do small startup companies end up becoming stronger and bigger than companies that started out much stronger? Why do we see this perplexing business phenomenon happen time and time again? For answers to this baffling situation, take a listen.
Why do companies fail? Why do smaller companies with less experience, less money, very little talent end up taking out much larger companies? Time and time again in America and around the world, we see this happen in business. It is a phenomenon that has endured as long as business has existed. Why is that? Scavengers. Scavengers are the reason big companies begin to make bad decisions and eventually fail. You see, big companies are like the proverbial lion in the jungle. Just as the entire jungle gets to see the lions hunt, so it is in the business world. Everyone, including the competition, government, regulatory agencies, and even some good-for-nothing attorneys who like to sue at the drop of a pen, are aware of the big companies and how much money and profit they are pulling into the coffers every quarter. Just as the hyenas and vultures show up when the lion is about to eat lunch, so do the entities I just mentioned show up uninvited to lunch at the big corporations. How do they show up? They show up in the form of class action lawsuits. They show up in the form of fines and penalties from government agencies for labor and code violations. They show up in the form of antitrust lawsuits. They show up in the form of attorneys bringing all kinds of lawsuits for claims associated with accidents and countless other matters, merited or otherwise. Many big companies end up settling a lot of these frivolous lawsuits, obviously, not because they think they are in violation of any laws, but because they believe it is more advantageous to pay off the litigants and avoid the bad publicity associated with a lawsuit, as well as the expenses that come with litigation. These big corporations spend so much energy and effort trying to ward off the scavengers to such an extent that deep fear sets in regarding every aspect of their operations. They begin to think in terms of how to avoid exposing themselves to the scavengers instead of concentrating on making sound business decisions. The sound business decisions that got them to the top of their industry are no longer the focus of deliberations. Instead, how not to get fined or sued becomes the preoccupation of these big companies. Going back to why startup companies end up taking out the big companies, my view on this never-ending and yet perplexing cycle is because the startup companies do not lose sleep over the scavengers. Just like the cobra, the startup companies eat lunch in peace. The small companies make sound business decisions based on taking care of their employees and customers without much regard for fines, penalties, lawsuits, or regulatory bottlenecks. While the small companies are improving processes based on sound business decisions, the big companies are busy making fear-based decisions based on trepidations of the scavengers. The repeated fear-based bad decisions eventually catch up with the big companies, and they collapse on their own proverbial swords while the small companies thrive. My question is, what happens after the big companies flounder? The inevitable takes place when the big companies are no more. The small companies take over the show and in turn become the proverbial lion in the jungle that must watch out for the scavengers. How does the new lion prevent the same fate as its predecessors? How does the new big company concentrate on what is best for business operations, succeed in warding off the scavengers, and preoccupy itself with making sound business decisions like it always has without losing focus and paying undue attention to the prevention or mitigation of fines and judgments? What did Rockefeller do after the Supreme Court ruled against him and ordered the dissolution of Standard Oil on May 15, 1911? Rockefeller did the greatest thing in history of business. He grew small. Growing small is how he maneuvered and came out ahead. He split his company into 34 independent companies. He still maintained shares in the new independent companies and became richer in the split than when the companies ran as one unit. Classic example of growing small. Why businesses have failed to adopt this strategy beats my imagination. Growing small is how a big company avoids the travails of His Royal Majesty, the Lion. Quickly split up and reorganize so there is no appearance of pure dominance. I believe there are different ways of achieving the split-up strategy effectively, but it must take place if any big company desires peace in operating a profitable business without having to preoccupy itself with the pesky scavengers. Stay a cobra and never transform into a lion.